Dr. Rafaella Siagkri, and I am an architect, trained as an architect, but mainly educator. I'm teaching in interior architecture, mainly at the University of Brighton, but also my specialization is in architecture visualization, specifically in virtual reality and architecture in cinema. And I am first year as a chair of virtual and immersive environments in art school at the University of Brighton, where we are trying to enhance the collaboration between cross-disciplinary courses. So I thought to put a little bit of background about from where I'm coming from and what was my studies before. So I did my architecture visualization master in University of Kent, and followed there my PhD. That it was a cross-disciplinary between architecture and computing visual arts. I started teaching at the University of Brighton 4 years ago, but before that I had an associate experience as an associate lecturer in the University of Kent, where I teach architecture visualization and undergrads. And I worked a little bit in the industry as a junior architect in Greece, but I decided that industry is not for me. So I went to research and academia instead. However, I do work with a lot of artists and I try to do some curatorial work. This is an exhibition that we did last year in Athens with students' works and famous artists in Greece about a work and a disciplinary work that is called There's No Place Like Home, about places of domestic abuse and spaces and art related. And I was also part of the Venice Biennale in 2014, again, as a early young me, again, visualization and how you could imagine Istanbul in the future in 2064. So I do have a background of kind of like, I approach architecture from a bit of an artistic way. I also did some projection mapping and as part of my work. I worked a little bit on projection in buildings, and then I discovered that I wanted to go through a little bit more into visualization furthermore. So, about what I did in my PhD, and I finished now, all done, thanks God, I finished that part, but I loved my research and I want to continue working on it. So, I don't know if you have seen the film Caligari. Yeah, Dr. Caligari, yes, you have seen that. It's not usually the case, it's really rare. But basically my PhD was called Le Caligarisme, Architectural Space and Virtual Reality. And basically what it was my main question is if virtual reality could be used as an investigative tool to understand expressionistic, abstract architecture space. Why expressionism? The movement of expressionism, it has to do with basically people expressing their emotions, their fears, their words back in Germany in 1920s, and basically become a movement that it had a limited presence in real life, and it was being called by historians as a paper movement. So even when we are talking about expressionist architecture, we don't really see it in the real world, but we see it through films. And it came out as an idea of like, okay, well, if it does exist through drawings, how can we describe that it looks, I don't know, claustrophobic, distorted, dramatic, makes you feel fear without really being in a space like that? So the idea was that by recreating these expressionist stage sets, it's important for restoration purposes in order to preserve this cultural heritage of expressionist movement, not only from the filmmaking perspective, but also from the architectural standpoint. So what best than choosing a case study, and the case that I chose was the cabinet of Caligari, because it's been considered as the masterpiece of expressionism, the first horror film argumentatively, but basically was the idea that this case study will visualize the reconstruction of some of the most important, significant expressionistic architecture stages in architecture, but also in cinematography. So through my PhD, I went through a lot of moves and things. It was a PhD by practice. So I work with archival materials, mainly in the Deutsche Cinemathek Museum in Germany, and also the Cinémathèque Française in Paris. And this is a complete graphic document archival that I worked. It was a 170 graphic documents that, from those, the most important ones was by the actual architect of the film, Hermann Wurm, and then which they were being used. It was the architectural drawings that they were the most important to could recreate that in VR. I needed to do a quite systematic analysis of those drawings in order to understand which one of those they're going to give me important details in order to actually use them for reconstruction. So I needed to go through the film, separate the film from the shots to the scenes with the same location, time into the scenes, then find all the drawings that they were related to specific scenes, and from the scenes to just make sure how many times this is film set shows into the film, and then see what of those drawings they could offer me later on to reconstruct them. The most important ones, with no surprise, was the technical drawings. I was an architect as well, so it was like those that they will help me to reconstruct it in VR. So I was searching for all the documents that they had approximately all the information that you can see here. So floor plan, section, elevation, necessary to see the architecture signature, good to have a dimension. You can see the camera position, but also a scale of the drawing so you can understand how big that was. And then it was another thing about understanding German. I don't know German, so that was a bit of a shocking moment of like, okay, AI didn't exist I did exist, but not in that way that it's easy to just put it there and say, translate that for me. So manually finding every information that I needed, separate which is the backgrounds that I need, the length, the width, and represent it. So all the drawings that they had that enough information to be built, they were being used. And this is basically the VR space that I have recreated. So that was the studio with all the film sets, and you can see with the dotted lines over here where was the place the camera outside. So that's, even if the drawing doesn't offer that, but that's a glass house. So the camera was positioned outside of the studio in order to film it. And then after the 2 weeks of the filming process, they were taking down and then rebuilding the new sets and finishing the film shooting. Basically, this is the space. Here you can see one of the film sets from outside. and how they were in the studio as well. So you're moving all around, and then this is one other of the sets. And this is how it looks in the film. And then how this looks in the VR if you go inside and you see it. It's a walkthrough VR, so you can go around and see it. It doesn't have any kind of locomotion or any like jumping into the space. So you can actually understand the size of the building, how big it was. If you have enough space, you can go to many other locations of the VR. Through a pilot study and through different studies, it was a concern about, are you recreating it as a glass house, then therefore you see the lighting from outside the building, or do you recreate the lighting of the film? At the start, we started with ambient light because we didn't have enough information about the film set's lights, so we didn't know the lamps, how many there were. So, but after the pilot study, we discovered that changing the understanding of the actual film in the architecture of the film. So therefore, we used the film to recreate the film lighting on the bottom down there. So that you can see two VR simulations, the one with the ambient light starting from that position and the other one in a different set. Then we did an analysis with quantitative and qualitative analysis in 3 different conditions. We put through people in we put the participants to go through a film so they can see the film and then answer some questions about how they could describe the space, so characteristics of expressionism, then answering about spatial understanding of the space, but also spatial perception. So different type of questions. We were collecting data, and then we were going to the VR static, asking the same questions, receiving data, and then basically the VR moving. The VR static with the VR moving is that basically in the VR static, they were sitting on a specific place. They could only rotate their body or sit down and change the height. But with the VR moving, they could go and walk around the space. That's some of the questions that we are asking. Average height, how many people they have heard of the film, how many they have watched it. So, Bowen, you are in the 3% of the population that have watched the film, but the most of them, they didn't know it. And also, the most of the people, we can see that basically they did feel more claustrophobic in the VR rather than actually, but when they were watching the VR, basically they weren't feeling as claustrophobic as in the film, which is weird considering that they had the headset on. But also they could understand, as it makes sense, especially with the current literature, that they could understand better the space in the VR. But they couldn't feel expressionistic characteristic as strong in the VR simulation vs what they were seeing in the film. They had also an open question about a phenomenological reflection of the work. So we asked them also to understand basically how differently they feel the space and what makes them feel different. And it came out some of the themes from that question, that it was saying that there were stronger positive feelings in VR conditions rather than in the film. That some factors that affected how differently they were feeling, it was because of how they were having some type of agency in the VR simulation. So they had the agency what to see and where to move, rather than they felt that the film was imposing something to them, watching-wise. And therefore, that make them feel kind of like that they didn't have control of the feelings as much as in the VR, which was one of the strongest, I would say, outputs that we took out of it. Another thing that factors that caused limited spatial understanding in film, it was the lighting condition. When in the VR, they felt even if the lighting was lower, that they had a better understanding of the space. And also, obviously, about how actors, they could distract them around in the space. So that was some of the outputs that they came out. So that's some very statistical and analysis of what was significant and what not. But basically, you can see how in the VR static condition, they had a better not claustrophobic feeling. They were having better understanding of the spatial space and how it was the layout of the space, but also how the space, distances wise, they could understand better the space. We had also some problems sometimes. So there is a moment in the VR that you have a step and that causes a break of presence. So they understand at the time that they are not in a VR, but in the real space. So it was a bit of a hesitation how they will move around. But also you could see how people, they start measuring the space, which is interesting. Some people, they start measuring the space by walking. Some people, they try to measure the space by hands. It didn't work, so they went back to stepping and measuring their steps in order to understand how big it was a space. So some conclusions very quickly. It was that a VR simulation reconstruction of the Expressionist films, it needs to be considered that it's a different experience based on who you are as a person and from where subject are you coming from. So it's different if you are the value of the VR simulation is different from an architecture perspective, vs if you are a skinning designer, if you are an architect, if you are an artist, an archivist, or just a film fan. So it has different value to you. But also, we can argue that is the most close representation and accurate reconstruction that exists at the moment with all the materials and the archival work that has been used. So future work, it's about sharing that and creating potentially an immersive archive with the museums, Deutsche Cinemathek and La Cinémathèque Française. Enable this methodology, and I'm going through major revisions about the methodology of how they created it, and give this kind of digital preservation of cultural heritage in cinema, but also in architecture, and apply potentially this methodology to other films with other different characteristics that they have. Current work also, I'm continuing the VR analysis, but also with some of my colleagues. So this is here is work from, as a PI, principal investigator is Marco Bernagozzi, but in collaboration with Marco Pico as well, we're working how VR could potentially impact your thermal comfort. So how potentially the different spaces that you see could make you feel different on thermal vibes. And we had some positive reactions from people that we saw that basically it was a question, can your eyes trick your thermostat? And it did. We found out that basically if you are in a more ambient environment, you feel warmer, just because even if the temperature is exactly the same, you're gonna feel warmer on that one. So that was something that we really enjoyed investigating and is going through a different way that is more not artistic as much, but more in the engineering side. So thank you for that. So hopefully I didn't take as much time.